I just feel really sad for the monarchy at times because I know that's what Meghan has in her sights to do things to people like Catherine, things that came out in that book, about calling them racist. Like she takes the most egregious thing you can say about a person and it has it put in a book. It's just so tragic and sad.
There is a woman who faced one of the most frightening moments a mother can experience a cancer diagnosis, and she did it quietly, privately, and with extraordinary composure. She didn't rush to a camera. She didn't monetize the fear. She didn't wrap herself in a victim narrative and wait for the world to applaud her suffering. She simply told the truth, thanked her doctors, and turned her gaze outward. And there is another woman, one who has made a very deliberate career out of presenting herself as the most wronged, most misunderstood, most spectacularly mistreated woman in the Western world, who recently reacted to a single joke on an American comedy program by reportedly cutting off an entire television network. One of these women is beloved by millions. The other cannot seem to understand why. And today, we are finally going to explain exactly why that is. If you are watching this, the chances are you already know in your bones what this story is about. You feel it. The contrast between Catherine, Princess of Wales, and Meghan Markle is not something you have to be told. It is something most people, particularly women of a certain wisdom and experience, absorb on some deep, almost instinctive level. You see it in how each of them moves through the world. You sense it in the way one of them makes you feel warm and the other makes you feel vaguely exhausted. But feelings are one thing. What is happening right now in the world of royal commentary is something rather more specific, rather more pointed, and rather more damning for Meghan Markle than a mere gut feeling. Because in recent weeks, a remarkable convergence has taken place. Royal commentators, respected essayists, cultural critics, and sharp-eyed observers of the monarchy have all begun arriving at the same conclusion through completely different routes. They have all been examining the same evidence: the photographs, the interviews, the public appearances, the private reports, and reaching the same verdict. Catherine, Princess of Wales, is everything a future queen should be. And Meghan Markle is not only failing to build anything comparable, she is actively, demonstrably, almost compulsively making herself the opposite. That is quite a statement, and it deserves to be explored with the seriousness and the intelligence it requires. Because this is not simply a matter of fashion choices or public smiles. This is about character. This is about what a person truly is when the pressure becomes unbearable. This is about grace, genuine, hard-won, costly grace versus performance. And the difference between those two things, once you see it clearly, is impossible to unsee. So today, we are going to take you through it all. We are going to look at the contrast that has captured the attention of royal observers worldwide. We are going to examine what Meghan's latest behavior reveals about who she really is. And we are going to answer the question that millions of women, particularly women who have spent their lives valuing dignity, loyalty, and quiet strength, have been asking. Why does one woman command love that feels almost unconditional, while the other cannot seem to hold on to goodwill for longer than a news cycle? The answer, it turns out, is hiding in plain sight, and it is more revealing than anything Meghan Markle has ever said about herself.
She definitely shows herself to be strong, and her appearance just comes off very glowingly because she has this authentic grace about her that just shines through. And that's what we see. And because Meghan is the complete opposite of that, this is why she comes out looking a hot mess.
To understand why this moment matters, why this particular conversation about Catherine and Meghan is landing so differently from all the others, you have to understand what the past year and a half has actually looked like for Catherine, Princess of Wales. Cast your mind back. Not so long ago, Catherine disappeared from public view, and almost immediately the internet did what the internet does. Wild theories proliferated. Social media became a feeding frenzy of speculation, conspiracy, and frankly ugly insinuation. Questions about her marriage, her health, her whereabouts, even extraordinarily her relationship with her own children, swirled in the most toxic corners of online discourse. Some of the speculation came from anonymous accounts with nothing to lose, but some of it came from people who really should have known better. Public figures, commentators, Even, it pains one to say, some journalists who gave oxygen to theories that were as baseless as they were cruel. And throughout that period, through every rumour, through every theory, through every cruel headline and every intrusive question, Catherine said nothing. She did not send out a spokesperson to bat away the stories. She did not post an Instagram video in a carefully curated garden setting to prove she was fine. She did not reach out to sympathetic journalists to plant reassuring counter-narratives. She simply went quiet, and she let her family come first, because that is who she is. That is the hierarchy of values she operates by, and it has never wavered, not once, in more than 2 decades of public life. When she finally did speak, when the speculation had reached such a pitch that a brief, dignified address became necessary, she did something that left even her harshest critics momentarily silenced. She told the truth, quietly, clearly, without drama or theatre. There had been a cancer diagnosis. The family had needed time to process it privately, particularly for the sake of the children. She was grateful to her medical team. She was in the early stages of recovery. And then, and this is the detail that strikes at the very heart of who Catherine is, she turned the conversation away from herself. She spoke to others facing illness. She offered empathy, not as a brand strategy, but as a genuine human impulse. "You are not alone," she said, and you knew she meant it. That is not a media strategy. That is not a PR calculation. That is a woman who, at the most frightening moment of her adult life, still thought about other people first. And for the millions of women watching women who have faced their own medical scares, their own frightening diagnoses, their own moments of private terror that resonated in a way that no amount of carefully crafted messaging ever could. You cannot write that. You cannot brief a publicist on how to create that impression. It either comes from somewhere real, or it doesn't come at all. And in Catherine's case, anyone watching could see, with absolute clarity, that it came from somewhere very real indeed.
The problem you've got here in a relationship with Meghan and Harry is this is a boy that was pretty much traumatised by media presence when he was little. He didn't really want any of this publicity. He was always attacking photographers. And she's someone, ever since she was on the red carpet, who's craved publicity.
Now, against that backdrop, against the image of a woman facing cancer with quiet dignity and composure, let us consider what Meghan Markle has been doing. An essay written by the commentator known as Queen Esther has been circulating widely in royal circles and beyond, and it makes an argument that is both straightforward and deeply uncomfortable for Meghan's remaining supporters. The essay examines the specific, concrete ways in which Catherine and Meghan have handled adversity, and it concludes that the difference is not simply one of personality or preference, it is one of fundamental character. The essay notes, for instance, that Catherine has spent more than 2 decades in the public eye, facing scrutiny of a kind that would break most people. Long before she became the Princess of Wales, before the wedding, before the children, paparazzi camped outside her flat. Her every appearance was dissected. Her weight, her clothes, her expressions, her family, all of it fodder for a press that can be, when it chooses, genuinely merciless. Topless photographs were published without her consent in 2012, a violation of the most personal kind, one that would have been entirely understandable to react to with fury and public condemnation. She handled it legally, quietly, and with a composure that was at the time quite remarkable. There was the edited photograph controversy, a moment that was seized upon by certain corners of the internet, with what can only be described as indecent glee. Catherine's response? A brief apology, an acknowledgement that she had learned her lesson, and then silence. No lengthy explanation, no blaming of staff, no counter-narrative planted through sympathetic outlets, just ownership, and then movement forward. And this, the essay argues, is precisely why Catherine commands the kind of deep, durable public affection that Meghan has never been able to manufacture, no matter how many carefully staged appearances, no matter how many podcast episodes, no matter how many magazine covers. Because Catherine's grace is not performed, it is not constructed, it simply is. And people, particularly people who have lived long enough to know the difference between authenticity and its imitation, can feel that distinction in their bones. The contrast with Meghan could not be more stark, and it goes far deeper than fashion choices or public smiles, as we are about to see. It goes to the very question of why people connect with some public figures and not others. Why some women inspire genuine, lasting loyalty, and others generate attention that burns bright and fades? The answer, Queen Esther's essay argues, is not fame or beauty or talent or even kindness in any simple sense. It is something quieter and harder to name. It is the willingness to subordinate yourself to put the role, the people, the purpose, above the self. Catherine has done that, consistently and at real personal cost, for her entire adult public life, and the world has noticed.
Meghan is always going to be on the short end of anything that Catherine does, because Catherine is the real deal. This is why we see her the way we do, and Meghan is just not that. She never will be. Just look at how she left the royal family to show you the kind of woman she is, what she did to the late queen.
Let us talk about the photograph, because among the many contrasts that have recently been drawn between Catherine and Meghan, the one involving their respective public appearances has been particularly pointed, particularly revealing, and frankly rather difficult to look away from. Catherine was recently photographed attending a visit to the University of East London. She wore, as she so often does, a perfectly tailored, elegant outfit, a beige suit that was immaculate in its fit, understated in its luxury, and entirely appropriate to the occasion. There was nothing showy about it, nothing desperate, nothing that screamed, "Look at me." She simply looked exactly as a future queen should look, poised, purposeful, and genuinely interested in the people she was there to meet. The photographs were not, one imagines, particularly interesting to the fashion press. They will not become iconic images. They will simply be what they are, evidence of a woman doing her job with care and without fuss. Meghan, meanwhile, made her appearance at the Time 100 summit in an outfit that, and multiple observers have noted this independently, was ill-fitting and visibly wrinkled. Now, one might argue that clothing is a trivial matter in the grand scheme of things, and perhaps it is in isolation. But what makes this particular contrast so telling is not the clothing itself. It is what the clothing reveals about the two women wearing it. Because Catherine, by her own admission and by the admission of those who know her well, has no particular interest in fashion as a pursuit. She does not obsess over it. She does not build a brand around it. And yet she consistently, reliably, effortlessly looks the part. Because looking the part comes naturally to a woman whose focus is always outward on the people she is meeting, the work she is doing, the role she is fulfilling. Meghan, by contrast, has devoted enormous energy to constructing a public image. Fashion is central to her brand, her lifestyle platform, her aesthetic, her curated persona, all of it is built around a very specific idea of elegance and taste. And yet, when the moment came, the suit was wrinkled. The fit was off. The effect was not the one she intended. And that too is not really about the clothes. It is about the chasm between ambition and authenticity, between trying to look like something and simply being it. You cannot manufacture the quality that Catherine has. You can observe it, you can imitate it, you can spend a great deal of money trying to replicate its surface appearance. But at some point in a photograph, in a public moment, in a candid shot taken when the carefully maintained performance slips even slightly, the difference reveals itself. And when it does, the contrast is not subtle. It is, as royal observers have noted, rather glorious in its clarity. What is particularly striking is that Catherine appears to have no awareness of any of this. She does not walk into a room thinking about how she looks relative to her sister-in-law. She does not choose her outfits as competitive moves in an ongoing style battle. She simply gets dressed, does her job, and goes home to her children. And the fact that this effortless approach consistently produces a more powerful impression than Meghan's intensely strategic one is perhaps the most perfectly illustrative demonstration of everything we are talking about today.
Everything is so reactive. And the thing about royalty sometimes is that you almost have to float and rise above it.
And it's a winning strategy, especially with someone like Meghan, because whenever she opens her mouth or tries to, say, oh, this is not true, it misses the mark every single time. Because Meghan is just not a woman of character.
There is a moment in this story that deserves to be examined carefully, because it tells you almost everything you need to know about where Meghan Markle is right now, and why her trajectory keeps pointing in the wrong direction, despite her evident and frantic efforts to reverse it. During the weekend update segment of a recent episode of Saturday Night Live, a joke was made that referenced Meghan. The joke was part of a larger bit about the British royal family, and it landed with the kind of sharp, quick irreverence that SNL has always deployed against public figures of every political stripe, every nationality, and every level of fame. It was not kind. But then, SNL jokes rarely are. They have done it to presidents, to prime ministers, to cultural icons of every description. Being the subject of an SNL joke is, in some circles, considered a mark of genuine cultural relevance. The program has been making these jokes since 1975. It is, by any measure, a rite of passage. And how did Meghan Markle respond to this moment of cultural relevance? According to multiple sources close to her inner circle, she has quietly but definitively placed NBC, the network that airs Saturday Night Live, on what is being described as a permanent blacklist. She is, sources say, furious. She sees the joke not as comedy but as deliberate, personal establishment ridicule. She does not laugh when she feels publicly humiliated. And once she decides someone has crossed a line, she shuts the door. Sources describe the reaction inside her circle as immediate. NBC is out. Now, stop and consider what this response reveals. Consider it against the backdrop of everything we have just discussed about Catherine, a woman who has faced years of sustained, personal, genuinely vicious criticism and speculation, and has never once publicly reacted with anything approaching this kind of petty, retaliatory fury. Then consider that Meghan is reportedly severing ties with an entire major American television network over a joke, a single joke, on a comedy program that has been making this kind of joke about this kind of person since 1975. The word that comes to mind, and it is not a harsh word, it is simply the accurate one, is thin-skinned. Extraordinarily, almost performatively thin-skinned. And that thin skin, when you hold it up next to Catherine's extraordinary composure under genuine pressure, does not merely make Meghan look bad, it makes the gap between them look almost unbridgeable. There is also something specifically revealing about this particular reaction. Because the SNL joke, whatever one thinks of its taste or its fairness, was the kind of thing that a genuinely confident person absorbs, maybe privately rolls her eyes at, and then moves on from. The public figures who handle this kind of thing most gracefully are the ones who have enough security in their own identity that a joke on a comedy program cannot threaten it. They know who they are. They do not need the world's approval to confirm it, and that security or its conspicuous absence is written all over Meghan's response.
I just think she's crying for sympathy, playing the victim when there's nothing to be a victim about, and there's also no sympathy to be granted for this lifestyle that she's chosen to live.
What makes Meghan's NBC response particularly striking and particularly self-destructive is the strategic context in which it is happening. Because this is not a woman operating from a position of such enormous strength and influence that she can afford to burn bridges with major media organizations. This is a woman whose television show was not renewed, whose podcast has largely faded from view, whose brand has struggled to find the foothold she clearly believed it would command. This is a woman who needs allies in the American media landscape, not enemies. And yet, the door to NBC, apparently, is now closed. There is something almost painful about watching a person make decisions this counterproductive in real time, because the strategic error here is not subtle, it is glaring. Saturday Night Live does not operate under the editorial control of NBC News. It does not operate under the editorial control of The Today Show. It functions as its own creative entity, and its jokes are not never have been subject to network-wide approval or disapproval. To punish the entire NBC network for a joke made by Saturday Night Live's writers is a bit like refusing to shop at an entire supermarket chain because you disagreed with the behavior of one checkout assistant in one branch. It reveals a profound misunderstanding of how the American media landscape actually works. And beyond the strategic incoherence, there is something else worth noting. Something that speaks to a fundamental difference in temperament between Meghan and the public figures who genuinely thrive in the long term. The people who last, the ones who build durable reputations, who accumulate genuine goodwill, who become institutions rather than punchlines, are not the ones who react to mockery by cutting people off. They are the ones who laugh, who absorb the joke, sometimes even amplify it, and thereby demonstrate something powerful and appealing. the confidence of a person who is entirely comfortable in their own skin. That quality, that easy, undefended confidence, is something Catherine has in abundance. It is something, the evidence strongly suggests, that Meghan has never possessed and is running out of time to develop. And here is the thing that the people around Meghan really ought to be saying to her, if they are genuinely in her corner. The shows that matter, the ones that can actually shift a narrative, the ones that reach the audiences she needs, are not going to roll out a red carpet for someone with a reputation for being difficult, for cutting off access, for holding grudges against entire organizations because of jokes. Hollywood is a town that talks to itself, and the story it is telling about Meghan Markle right now is not the one she would choose. It is the story of a woman who takes herself so seriously that she cannot absorb even the gentlest mockery. And that story, wherever it gets told, makes every future opportunity harder to secure.
She can't make fun of herself. And that's why she comes off so poorly, because she can't make fun of herself. She takes herself way too seriously, I think. And this is why she's always so upset about what people say and joke about her. You know, this is Hollywood. This is comedy. You know, you need to try to lighten up.
To understand why this pattern keeps repeating itself, you have to look at the history. Because what we are seeing now, the reactive fury, the blacklists, the frantic counter-narratives, is not new behavior for Meghan. It is the latest expression of a character that has been consistent, in all its essential features, for a very long time. Consider the pattern. When coverage turned unfavourable at Vanity Fair, sources say she distanced herself from the outlet. When the British press did not provide the coverage she felt she deserved, she and Harry launched a sweeping legal campaign against multiple newspapers. When the palace did not operate in the way she expected it to, she left and then gave an interview that was watched by millions worldwide, an interview in which she made claims that were, according to multiple authoritative sources, significantly at odds with the accounts of those who were actually there. And throughout all of this, throughout every reactive move, every burned bridge, every door that has been closed, there has been a consistent, underlying pattern. When Meghan feels wronged, she does not simply absorb the blow and move forward. She does not let it go. She keeps a record. She nurtures the grievance. And eventually, the grievance finds an outlet in a legal action, in a carefully placed story, in a memoir, in a podcast episode, in a whispered briefing to a sympathetic journalist. The contrast with Catherine could not be more revealing. Because Catherine has been genuinely, objectively wronged many times. The topless photographs were a violation. The phone hacking was a violation. The conspiracy theories during her illness were cruel and unfair. The speculation about her marriage was deeply intrusive. And Catherine's response to all of it, every single instance, has been to absorb it, to protect her family, and to continue doing her job with the same steady, focused composure. She does not keep score. She does not plot retaliation. She simply carries on, and in carrying on, she demonstrates a strength that no amount of fighting back could ever manufacture. That is what grace under fire actually looks like. Not the absence of pain. No one who knows anything about human nature would suggest Catherine doesn't feel these things deeply. But the choice, made deliberately and consistently, to not let the pain define your response, to not let the wound become the story.
There's a huge hypocrisy here given Catherine, Catherine suffering from cancer was hauled over the coals, especially in the American mainstream media. Yet Meghan sort of posts these pictures which all appear to be artificially altered. The actual pictures of the children, which are always so weird.
Meghan was warmly welcomed in Britain, that everyone in the royal family tried their very, very hardest to make her feel at home and accommodate her, but that unfortunately Meghan only wanted to be the star and made it impossible for her and the royal family to collaborate.
And where, in all of this, is Harry? Because Harry is always somewhere in this story, never quite the protagonist, never quite absent, but always present in the background as a kind of cautionary figure, a man whose own choices have increasingly come to define him in ways that would have been unimaginable a decade ago. It is worth taking a moment to think about Harry. Not to pile on, he has enough commentators willing to do that, but to understand the full picture of what is happening in the Sussex household and why it matters to the broader story of the monarchy. Because Harry's position right now is, by most accounts, a deeply uncomfortable one. He is a man who walked away from everything he had been raised to be, who traded an institution for a marriage, and who now appears, according to multiple independent sources, to be increasingly uncertain about whether that trade was the right one. At 40 years old, Harry is a man caught between worlds. He cannot return to royal life, the bridges are burned too thoroughly, the wounds are too raw, and the public appetite for a Sussex rehabilitation is, frankly, not what it was. But the life he has built in California does not appear to be filling whatever void he was hoping it would fill. He does not seem settled. He does not seem content. And the gap between what he presents to the world, the activist, the wellness advocate, the reformed prince making his own way, and what those close to him describe privately is, by all accounts, rather substantial. What is it that Harry actually wants? Those who know him suggest it is something surprisingly simple, something that Meghan's ambitions may make permanently impossible. He wants, it seems, to go home. Not literally, perhaps, though, who knows, but to return to something that felt familiar, to be part of something larger than himself that didn't require constant reinvention. To stop having to be a brand. The institution he left behind, whatever its flaws, gave him that. California, and the life Meghan has built there, does not. And that tension, quiet, unspoken, but increasingly visible to those paying attention, is perhaps the most significant story in the Sussex world right now.
Harry doesn't seem to understand that his life is going to be forever changed once he decides to do what he wants to do. And I know that is to no longer stay in California and to have his life back. And the minute he takes that step, that's when the threat, that's when the risk to his own life and that of his own family, the reputation becomes at stake, because that's exactly what's going to happen. Meghan has been documenting for years everything. We all know Harry is very miserable right now. I think the signs are there that Harry wants to get back to his royal life. He needs to get back to what is familiar to him.
So what is really going on behind the scenes? What is the strategy, if there is one, that is driving Meghan's current behavior? Because it is tempting to look at the NBC boycott, the reactive PR, the frantic attempts to control coverage, and conclude that there is no strategy, that Meghan is simply reacting, emotionally and impulsively, to each new challenge as it arrives. But that, those close to the situation argue, would be to underestimate her. And underestimating Meghan Markle has historically been an error. The picture that emerges from those who have watched her most carefully is of a woman who is simultaneously strategic and emotionally volatile, a combination that produces, in practice, a kind of chaotic cunning. She is always calculating, always aware of how she is being perceived, always working to manage that perception. But her emotional responses, the fury at the SNL joke, the reactive blacklisting sometimes overwhelm the calculation. And when they do, the result is decisions that serve her feelings but undermine her interests. The media strategy, such as it is, appears to be built around a simple but increasingly unrealistic premise, that if Meghan can get enough positive coverage in enough sympathetic outlets, the broader public narrative will shift in her favour. That if she shows up at enough events, gets photographed in enough settings, plants enough reassuring stories about her warmth and her philanthropy and her commitment to good causes, the image problem will eventually be solved. But here is what the people running that strategy appear not to understand. The image problem is not a communications problem. It cannot be fixed with better PR or friendlier journalists or more carefully curated social media content. The image problem is a character problem. And character, as Catherine's example demonstrates with almost painful clarity, is not something you can manufacture. It is something you either have or you don't. And the public, particularly the audiences that matter most, the ones who pay close attention, who have long memories, who care deeply about authenticity, have already made their assessment. And they are not, in any great numbers, changing their minds. The tragedy of the strategy, if tragedy is not too generous a word, is that the more relentlessly it is pursued, the more clearly it reveals its own failure. Every staged photograph, every planted story, every carefully orchestrated appearance at a high-profile event produces not the impression of authenticity, but its mirror image. And people feel that. They may not be able to articulate it precisely, but they feel when they watch Meghan, that they are watching a performance, and no amount of production value can make a performance feel like the real thing. Let us be quite specific about what critics are calling out, because the criticism of Meghan is not at its core about fashion or Instagram posts or podcast ratings. It is about something more fundamental, and it is worth naming it clearly. The criticism is about the systematic gap between what Meghan says and what Meghan does, between the narrative she presents about herself and the picture that emerges from those who have actually worked with her, lived alongside her, or observed her closely over time. And that gap, in recent months, has become so wide that even observers who were once inclined to give her the benefit of the doubt are finding it difficult to maintain that position. She has said, on multiple occasions and in multiple formats, that she doesn't read the press coverage, that she doesn't look at social media, that she is unbothered by what people say about her, that she has moved beyond the need for external validation, that her focus is entirely on the positive work she is trying to do in the world. And then a comedy program makes a joke, and she reportedly places an entire television network on a permanent blacklist. And insiders describe the reaction inside her circle as immediate and furious. Which version of Meghan Markle are we supposed to believe, the enlightened, media-proof wellness advocate, or the woman who is tracking every reference, cataloguing every perceived slight, and cutting off access to anyone who steps out of line? The answer, those who have known her longest would suggest, is that both versions are true, in a way. There is the Meghan she presents to the world, the curated, composed, aspirational figure who speaks about healing and purpose and living authentically. And then there is the Meghan who operates behind that presentation, reactive, controlling, hypersensitive to criticism, and willing to deploy considerable energy in the service of managing a narrative that keeps threatening to escape her control. The tragedy, if tragedy is not too generous a word, is that the more energy she devotes to the second Meghan, the more impossible it becomes to maintain the first. And this, ultimately, is what makes the contrast with Catherine so instructive. Because Catherine is not managing a gap between a public and private self. There is no elaborate architecture of performance to maintain. She is simply the same person in every setting, in the hospital ward and in the palace corridor, and in the school classroom and in the private family kitchen. That consistency, that maddening, admirable, impossible to fake consistency, is precisely what makes her so difficult to compete with. You cannot out-strategy authenticity. You can only be authentic or not.
When you think about Meghan, I see somebody who's sort of, you could say, cosmopolitan. She doesn't really like the countryside. She doesn't really like to get dirty. Meghan, of course, is hyper-focused on the royals. And I think Meghan always feels this massive inferiority complex. And so she's always trying to compete with Catherine in whatever way that she can.
And then there are the children, because any serious examination of the difference between Catherine and Meghan must eventually arrive here, at the question of what kind of mother each woman appears to be, what choices each has made about privacy, about exposure, about the use of her children's identities in the service of her public persona. Catherine and William have 3 children, George, who is 12, Charlotte, who is 11, and Louis, who is 8. All 3 children are, by any reasonable assessment, remarkably well adjusted for children growing up at the intersection of monarchy and global celebrity. They appear at carefully chosen public moments. They are photographed at significant occasions. But they are also given, as much as it is possible to give to children in their position, a genuine private life. A childhood that is not constantly mediated by cameras or social media or brand partnerships. William and Catherine have been consistent and firm about this, even when the pressure to share more, to post more, to give the public more access has been considerable. Meghan and Harry have 2 children, Archie, who is 7, and Lilibet, who is 4. And the approach to those children's public presence has been, to put it politely, rather different. There have been the carefully staged glimpses, the photographs released at strategic moments, the mentions in interviews, the use of the children's names and, critics argue, their identities in commercial contexts. There have been the complaints about privacy that sit alongside the decision to use the children as part of a public brand, in ways that some observers have described as deeply uncomfortable. The children themselves, of course, are entirely innocent in all of this. They are small people navigating an extraordinary world that they did not choose and cannot yet understand. And that is precisely why the choices their parents make on their behalf matter so much, because those choices reveal something about priorities, about what a parent values most. And when you compare the choices Catherine and William have made consistently, at real cost to their own desire to share their family with a public that adores them with the choices that have been made in California, the contrast is, once again, quietly devastating.
Catherine and William are highly engaged parents. We see this reflected, whereas Harry and Meghan, they just give us these little tidbits, and you just got to wonder, who are the kids with the rest of the time? Meghan is more than willing to fly off to New York overnight just to go to a play, and most moms don't do that.
The institution of the monarchy has watched all of this with an interest that is, by necessity, largely silent. The palace does not comment on Meghan's podcast ratings or her NBC relationships or her fashion choices or her reaction to Saturday Night Live. That is not how the institution operates, and frankly, it would be beneath them to do so, but silence should not be mistaken for indifference. And what is happening inside the institution, by all credible accounts, is a quiet but firm consolidation around a very different set of values. The monarchy has always understood something that Meghan appears not to have grasped, even after years of proximity to it, which is that the institution's power comes not from noise, but from restraint. Not from the volume of coverage it generates, but from the quality of the impression it leaves. Not from how many headlines it produces in a given week, but from the depth of the trust it has accumulated over generations. And that trust, slow to build, easy to lose, is precisely what Catherine embodies, and precisely what Meghan has spent several years eroding. King Charles has chosen, for the most part, to say nothing publicly about the situation with Harry and Meghan. That restraint has been interpreted in various ways by various observers, as weakness by some, as strategic patience by others. But the broader institutional response to the Sussex years has been, if anything, to double down on the values that most starkly contrast with everything the Sussexes represent: more genuine service, more quiet dedication, more of the steady, unglamorous, deeply meaningful work that Catherine exemplifies every time she walks into a hospital, a school, or a community centre, and actually listens to the people she meets. Because at the end of the day, that is what the monarchy is for, not for headlines, not for podcast episodes, or lifestyle brands, or Time 100 appearances, for service, quiet, consistent, unglamorous service. And Catherine, even in the middle of cancer treatment and recovery, even while battling the most frightening thing she has ever faced, has never lost sight of that, which is why the institution stands behind her with a confidence and a conviction that it has never, not for a single moment, extended to Meghan Markle. There is a broader warning embedded in this entire story, and it is worth drawing out explicitly, because what we are witnessing with Meghan is not simply the failure of a particular media strategy or a particular brand. It is something more instructive than that. It is an object lesson in what happens when a person builds an entire public identity on a foundation that cannot support the weight being placed on it. Meghan's public persona rests on a very specific set of claims: that she is authentic while others are performed, that she is brave while others are cowardly, that she speaks truth while others maintain comfortable fictions, that she represents progress and those who resist her represent something older and darker. These are not modest claims. They are sweeping, self-aggrandizing claims that positively demand a very high level of consistency. Because if you are the brave truth-teller, if you are the authentic one, then every moment of inauthenticity, every reactive, thin-skinned response, every gap between the person you claim to be and the person you demonstrably are, is not just an embarrassment, it is a contradiction. And contradictions, accumulated over time, become a verdict. The NBC boycott is a contradiction. The claimed indifference to press coverage, combined with the furious monitoring of every reference, is a contradiction. The commitment to privacy, combined with the strategic deployment of her children's images, is a contradiction. The advocacy for mental health and authentic living, combined with the relentless, exhausting machinery of image management, is a contradiction. And the public, the real public, not the carefully curated followers or the sympathetic journalists, or the circle of yes people that every celebrity of a certain kind surrounds themselves with the real public notices contradictions. Slowly, perhaps, but surely. Catherine does not make these contradictions because she does not make these claims. She does not position herself as the brave truth teller or the most authentic woman in the room. She simply does her job, steadily, consistently, day after day. And that consistency, that remarkable, quiet, unglamorous consistency, is ultimately what separates her not just from Meghan, but from almost every other public figure in the world right now. In an era of noise and performance and ceaseless self-promotion, Catherine's fundamental commitment to simply showing up and doing the work is paradoxically the most radical thing about her. The warning then is this: if you build yourself on claims, you will eventually be measured against them, and the measurement is rarely private. It happens in public, in real time, in front of the very audiences you were trying to impress. The gap between Meghan's claims and her behaviour has now been on display for long enough that those audiences have drawn their conclusions. Not with cruelty or not primarily, but with the quiet, firm certainty of people who have been paying attention and have seen enough to know what they are looking at.
She doesn't know how to be any one person. She's got no personality herself, so she just latches onto something, is my belief, and she goes, right, this is what I'm going to be right now, and then she gets bored of it and then she moves on.
So where does this leave the relationship between the Sussexes and the royal family? Where do things actually stand beneath the carefully managed silences and the occasional brief diplomatic gesture? The honest answer, based on everything we know from every credible source, is not well. The distance, geographical, emotional, institutional, is vast. And it is not a distance that is being meaningfully closed. There are no signs of the substantive reconciliation that certain optimistic commentators have periodically predicted. There is no evidence of the frank, healing conversations that would need to happen before anything resembling a genuine repair could begin. There is instead a kind of managed coexistence, two very different worlds, operating according to very different values, with a shared history that is becoming increasingly distant with every passing month. The CBS situation is worth dwelling on briefly, because it illustrates just how dramatically the American media landscape has shifted around Meghan. The network that once broadcast her Oprah interview, the one that delivered the most explosive royal bombshells in recent memory, is now, by multiple accounts, a rather different place. The departure of a particular late-night host who had been a reliable Sussex ally has left a significant gap in sympathetic coverage. The new ownership and new editorial direction has introduced voices and perspectives that are considerably less warm toward the kind of celebrity politics that the Sussexes represent. And if Meghan now also considers NBC beyond the pale, the universe of major American networks willing to offer genuinely favorable treatment is shrinking in a way that should, rationally, be causing serious concern. And through all of this, through every strategic misstep and every burned bridge, Catherine continues. She attends her engagements. She meets her people. She does the work. She asks the questions and then actually listens to the answers. She wears the slightly too warm outfit in the community hall without complaint. She crouches down to talk to children at the same level, looks elderly women in the eye, sits with people in difficult circumstances, and offers something that feels that is genuine. And millions of women look at her and see something they recognize, something they value, something they aspire to. Not the glamour, not the title, but the character. The quiet, consistent, unperformable character. The Sussexes, meanwhile, find themselves in a position that would have seemed unimaginable just a few years ago. The initial wave of sympathy that accompanied their departure from royal life, the sense, in some quarters, that they were brave pioneers striking out for a more authentic existence, has largely dissipated. What has replaced it is something rather less flattering. A growing sense, among those who have been paying close attention, that the story they told about themselves and the story that is actually unfolding are not the same story. And the gap between those two narratives, widening month by month, is the defining reality of the Sussex situation right now. Zoom out, take the very long view, and what does this story tell us about the world we are living in and the people we choose to admire? There is a temptation, particularly in media commentary, particularly in the age of social media, to frame the Catherine-Meghan contrast as a simple story of good versus bad, of heroine versus villain. And perhaps after everything we have examined today, that temptation is understandable. The contrast is stark. The evidence is considerable. The verdict of the most astute observers is pretty consistent. But the more interesting reading, the more useful one is this. What Catherine's example actually represents is not goodness in some abstract, saintly sense. It represents a very specific, very practical kind of emotional intelligence. The intelligence to understand that real influence, the kind that lasts, the kind that changes things, the kind that people remember and build upon, does not come from noise. It comes from trust. And trust, as Catherine's entire public life demonstrates, is built in one way and one way only. Through consistency, through showing up, through doing what you say you will do, over and over again, even when it is hard, even when it is frightening, even when no one is watching and the cameras have gone home. Meghan has spent years trying to find a shortcut to that kind of influence. A podcast, a lifestyle brand, a Netflix series, a carefully placed interview, a new platform, a new persona, and none of it has worked, not because the idea is wrong, but because the foundation is wrong. You cannot build trust with strategies. You can only build it with character. And character, as every woman over the age of 50 knows from hard personal experience, is not something you acquire. It is something you demonstrate, over and over under pressure, when it costs you something. Catherine has been demonstrating hers for more than 20 years, and the world, the quiet, attentive, emotionally intelligent world of women who have seen enough of life to know the real thing from the imitation, has been watching, and it has made its verdict. Not loudly, not cruelly, but with the quiet, firm, unshakable certainty of people who know exactly what they are looking at. The future queen they are watching is not the one who wanted the title most. It is the one who earned it, every single day. And in a world that is very good at rewarding performance and very bad at rewarding substance, that matters. It matters to the institution. It matters to the public. And it matters, perhaps most of all, to the millions of women who see in Catherine's example something they recognize from their own lives, the quiet satisfaction of doing the right thing, not because anyone is watching, but because it is simply who you are.
There was sort of several examples of her being rude to staff. I mean, I heard, that she was rude to the gardener, the under gardener, and the head gardener reported this to the Queen. The Queen got into her car and drove down and ticked her off because you're not to be rude to staff.
So here is the question I want to leave you with today, because I think it is one worth sitting with. Have you ever been in a situation in your own life, in your own relationships, in your own community, where you watched someone perform goodness and someone else simply live it? And did you notice how different those two things feel from the outside, however similar they might look at a glance? Because that is precisely what this story is about, not just Catherine and Meghan, but the oldest question in human nature. Can you fake it? Can you perform your way to genuine love and genuine respect? The evidence of the last several years suggests the answer is a resounding no. I would love to know what you think. Have you always seen the difference between these two women so clearly, or has this been a gradual realization? And what is it, for you personally, that Catherine has that so many public figures with all their resources and all their advisors and all their carefully crafted images simply cannot replicate? Let me know in the comments. I genuinely read them, and I genuinely want to know. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart, for being here today. This community of ours is something quite extraordinary. The conversations in the comments, the thoughtfulness, the passion you all bring to these discussions. It means more than you know. If today's video gave you something to think about, if it felt worth your time, please do give it a like. It helps more than you would imagine. And it means that more people get to find us and be part of this conversation. And if you haven't already subscribed, now would be the most wonderful moment to do that. We are here every single day with new stories, new analysis, and the kind of royal commentary that treats you like the intelligent, thoughtful person you are. Share this one with someone who you think would appreciate it, and I will see you tomorrow.